Hello, I'm Dave Hiskey and you're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel. In the video today, we're looking at why Yankee Doodle called the feather in his cap Macaroni and the origin of the song. As with a lot of older songs, the tune and music that we today associate with Yankee Doodle was actually written much earlier than the 18th century. The melody may have been heard as early as the 1500s in Holland with rather nonsensical lyrics about the harvest and farmers receiving their wages in buttermilk. Over the next 2 centuries, that particular melody bounced around Europe and was reappropriated for various other jingles, like describing the struggles of English Puritans or used in nursery rhymes. For instance,
Lucy Lockett lost her pocket, Kitty Fisher found it. Nothing in it, but the binding round it.
A rhyme that may or may not have been written before the tune started being used for Yankee Doodle. Another theory is that the Hessians were the ones who originally brought the tune to the colonies from Germany, where it was being used in a drinking song. Incidentally, the tune for Star Spangled Banner was originally used in a popular drinking song as well. Much like the origin of the melody, where the well-known lyrics came from is also not definitively known. One popular theory is that similar lyrics were first used to make fun of Oliver Cromwell, the 17th century English political and military leader, for fancying himself a fashionable person. The purported lyrics are sometimes said to have begun,
Yankee Doodle come to town upon a Kentish pony.
However, this seems unlikely considering the word Yankee didn't come along until years after Cromwell, with the first known documented instance appearing in 1683, used by Dutch settlers in New Amsterdam, today's New York, to disparage their English colonist neighbors in Connecticut. Stemming from the Dutch Janka, meaning Little John, Yankee was definitely intended as a belittling remark and became the European way to describe all American colonists, more or less being the equivalent of calling someone a country bumpkin, redneck, or dumb hick today. Incidentally, jaywalker is another term that originally had derogatory connotations, deriving from the insult jay, meaning more or less dumb hillbilly. The first known documented instance of the tune and the words Yankee and Doodle Dandy being put together in the same song, it seems, was around the 1750s during the French and Indian War. Prior to fighting for their independence against the British, the colonists were, of course, subjects of the English. Therefore, when the French and the Brits went to war over territories in the New World in 1753, the colonists were recruited to join in on the English side. Legend has it, whether true or not is anybody's guess, as no known hard, direct documented evidence has survived supporting this oft-told story that a British army surgeon named Dr. Richard Shuckburgh, who is known to have existed, saw the colonist recruits amble up to join the regular soldiers. Compared to the well-assembled and well-manicured English army, the colonists were a mess, wearing fashions that hadn't been seen in England in 100 years, and holding every weapon except those familiar to the fresh, well-drilled British troops. Dr. Shuckburgh couldn't help but laugh, and write a song. While not exactly the song we've come to know, the song that supposedly inspired Yankee Doodle, whether actually written by Dr. Shuckburgh or not, went like this.
Brother Ephraim sold his cow and bought him a commission, and then he went to Canada to fight for the nation. But when he came home, he proved an arrant coward. He wouldn't fight the Frenchman there for fear of being devoured. Sheep's head and vinegar, buttermilk and tansy. Boston is a Yankee town, sing hey doodle dandy.
The original sheet music for this song noted that the song should be sung through the nose and in the West Country drawl and dialect. In other words, it was meant to not only be mocking in lyrics, but tone as well. As for Brother Ephraim, this is thought to refer to a Colonel Ephraim Williams of the Massachusetts military, who ultimately was killed at the Battle of Lake George during the French and Indian War. Upon completing the lyrics, purportedly Dr. Shuckburgh gave it over to the Continental Marching Band, who played amid shouts of laughter in the English ranks. Whoever really wrote it, by 1768, the Boston Journal of the Times noted that the British were playing that Yankee Doodle song, though the Times didn't elaborate on what the lyrics were to this version. At this point, the song was constantly being remixed with slightly different lyrics, tunes, and meanings, as was common for pretty much all popular songs at the time. What united many of the earliest versions of this song was the not-so-subtle mocking of colonists as nothing more than moronic, unsophisticated country yokels. For instance, after George Washington was made commander of the rebel armies, some unknown individual wrote the following lyrics.
Then Congress sent great Washington, all clothed in parent breeches, to meet old Britain's warlike sons and make some rebel speeches. Yankee Doodle came to town for to buy a firelock. We will tar and feather him, and so we will John Hancock.
A slightly more familiar version to those of us today is also one of the earliest known versions, generally credited to Harvard sophomore and American Minuteman Edward Bangs.
Father, I went down to camp along with Captain Gooding. There we saw the men and boys as thick as hasty pudding. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. Mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy.
Continuing to turn the lyrics around, with the colonists variously either taking pride in the song and or directly mocking the British, we have lyrics like,
Yankee Doodle is the tune that we all delight in. It suits for feast, it suits for fun, and just as well for fighting.
Historians aren't completely sure when the verse about sticking a feather in his hat and calling it macaroni came to be. The oldest known print version of this didn't appear until all the way in 1842, published in London in the book The Nursery Rhymes of England by James Orchard Halliwell, though this particular lyric is obviously thought to date back to the American Revolution, partially due to the term being used here, which dates it somewhat, and how mocking the use of it was. Stepping back a little to a term related to macaroni, there's an interesting side tale about the evolution of the word doodle to one that's more used today, dude. According to esteemed etymologists Barry Popick and Gerald Cohen, dude was first used in the 1880s as a way to describe young New York City men who had an affinity for being flamboyantly well-dressed, well-manicured, and overly pretentious. In other words, a dandy. Using the very words that were used to mock colonists 100 years earlier, doodle dandy, people started to call these 19th century men that as well, as a means to essentially call them pretentious fools. Later, this got shortened to doodles, then to dudes. Eventually, the spelling was changed to dude, and if you're curious, the original female equivalent was dudine. Back to the related term macaroni. This term pertains to the habit of rich 18th century Englishmen going on so-called grand tours. Sort of like the more modern gap year, young adult men who could afford it would take long trips around Europe, learning about the culture, art, and history of neighboring countries. Particularly those from new money would sometimes come back with more refined tastes, like an appreciation for French art, fancy exotic clothes, and Italian food. These individuals often over-the-top attempts at trying to appear refined upon their return, speaking a mix of Latin and English, and wearing foppish attire complete with massive macaroni wigs and not one, but 2 pocket watches, were occasionally mocked for this. One of the nicknames they were given at this time was macaronis. The individuals were also considered to be part of the informal macaroni club, and would refer to flamboyant fashion and the like as very macaroni. For the origin of the term itself, it's presumed to originally derive from the fact that macaroni was a relatively exotic food for the British, and must have been something at least some of these individuals raved about upon return to England. The Oxford magazine described the so-called Macaroni Club members in 1770 as follows. There is indeed a kind of animal, neither male or female, a thing of the neuter gender, lately started up among us. It is called a macaroni. It talks without meaning, it smiles without pleasantry, it eats without appetite, it rides without exercise, it wenches without passion. In other words, when the particular lyrics, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni, were added to the Yankee Doodle song, the author was essentially saying that colonists were such low-class moronic fools that they thought by sticking a feather in their hat, they were being extremely refined and fashionable. In the end, there were possibly even hundreds of versions of Yankee Doodle in popular circulation during the American Revolution, some initially used by the British to mock their rebellious subjects. In turn, the Americans embraced the song, creating countless versions of their own, and other times simply taking pride in the lyrics, which were supposed to be mocking. This brings us to October 19th, 1781, when General Cornwallis formally surrendered to American and French forces at Yorktown, Virginia. Legend has it, as a way to mock the defeated troops, famed French commander and hero of the American Revolution, Marquis de Lafayette, ordered the band to play Yankee Doodle, with the victorious soldiers singing along. So thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a like below and consider sharing it with anyone you think might be interested. And for those of you of the American persuasion, happy 4th of July.